Eliza walked up the courthouse steps, her back straight and her eyes forward. She could feel the weight of the stairs on her, the whispers that followed her like a shadow. The town was alive with talk about her. The mayor's daughter accused of a terrible crime. She knew every look was full of judgment, and every whisper carried a story about her. The people had left their daily tasks to see what would happen to her. The courtroom was full, packed with faces she knew and some she didn't. Inside, the air felt heavy. The judge sat at his high desk, looking down at everyone. He was known for his strictness, a man who followed the rules without bending them. Eliza noticed the seriousness in his eyes. He was not someone to be swayed easily. The prosecutor stood ready, eager to prove her guilt. The room was silent, except for the soft rustle of papers and the occasional cough. Everyone waited for the trial to begin, each person eager to hear the details of the case. Eliza's mind was a mix of fear and determination. She knew the charges against her, but she also knew her own truth. She was innocent, but proving it seemed like a mountain too high to climb. Everyone in the room seemed ready to see her fall. Her father, Sheriff Jackson, sat at the back. She didn't look at him, but she felt his presence. Their relationship was strained, and she hadn't spoken to him in years. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he believed the whispers or if he still saw her as his daughter. The prosecutor began to speak. He painted a picture of Eliza as a jealous and angry daughter. He said she had acted out against someone she envied. His words were sharp, and he spoke with confidence. The evidence seemed clear to him. He wanted to make a name for himself, and this case was his chance. Eliza listened without showing much emotion, but inside, she was scared. She scanned the room, seeing familiar faces now looking at her with scorn and disbelief. Each person in the courtroom had their own thoughts about Eliza. Some remembered her as a kind girl who helped at church. Others saw her as distant, someone who kept to herself. Now their opinions shifted quickly, like leaves in the wind. Scandal had a way of changing people's minds. The courtroom was a mix of those who wanted to see her punished and those who were simply curious. But all of them were ready to judge. Sheriff Jackson sat quietly, watching. He was torn between his role as a lawman and his feelings as a father. Memories of Eliza as a child flashed through his mind. He remembered their arguments and the years they spent apart. Guilt tugged at him, but he stayed silent. He knew speaking up could risk his career. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do something. His daughter was alone up there, and he felt a pull to protect her. During a break in the trial, Jackson was approached by a stranger. The man was quiet and looked out of place in the crowd. He had information that could change everything, he said. There was a conspiracy, a plan to frame Eliza for a crime she didn't commit. Powerful people in town wanted to hide their own wrongdoings. Jackson was skeptical, but there was something about the stranger's eyes that made him listen. The stranger's words planted a seed of doubt in Jackson's mind. As the trial continued, Eliza's heart raced. She couldn't believe how quickly her life had changed. Just days ago, she was living her normal life, and now she stood accused in front of everyone she knew. Her mind wandered to the past, to moments that now seemed so distant. She thought of her father, wishing they had a better relationship. She needed someone to believe her, to stand by her, but she felt alone. The courtroom was tense as the defense attorney began to speak. He was calm, presenting new evidence that cast doubt on the prosecution's case. Some witnesses began to falter, their earlier statements now shaky. The mood in the room shifted slightly. The prosecutor's confidence seemed to waver, and Eliza felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe the truth would come out after all. She held onto that hope, even as fear threatened to take over. The town outside the courthouse was alive with chatter. People gossiped about the trial, each person adding their own twist to the story. Eliza's name was on everyone's lips. Some spoke of her guilt with certainty, while others expressed doubt. The town was divided, and the trial had become the main event. Shops closed early, and people gathered in small groups to discuss what they thought would happen next. Inside, Eliza stayed quiet, her thoughts racing. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she hoped for justice. She wanted to believe that the truth would win in the end. Her father's absence in her life felt heavier than ever. She wondered if he would step forward, if he would choose her over his duty. She didn't know if she could trust him, but part of her wished he would try. The break ended, and everyone returned to their seats. The room was buzzing with anticipation. The judge called for order and the trial resumed. Eliza braced herself for what would come next. She had to stay strong, even as the odds seemed stacked against her. She glanced at her father, but he kept his eyes forward. She couldn't read his expression, and that hurt more than she wanted to admit. The trial would continue, and Eliza knew she needed to hold on. She had to fight for herself even if no one else would. Her fate was uncertain, but she refused to give up. Each moment felt like an eternity, but she kept her head high. She would face whatever came next with courage. The truth was all she had, and she clung to it with everything she had. The trial continued, the air in the courtroom tense and charged with anticipation. The prosecutor stood in the center, ready to lay out his case against Eliza. His eyes scanned the room, settling on familiar faces. He knew many of them, and he wanted to impress them. He wanted this trial to be his moment. He began by describing Eliza as a young woman consumed by jealousy and anger. He painted a picture of a daughter who had acted out in a moment of rage. He said she couldn't stand being overshadowed by others in her family. His words were sharp, and he spoke with an intensity that captured the room. The evidence, he claimed, was clear. The prosecutor laid it out piece by piece. Each item meant to build a wall around Eliza, trapping her in guilt. Eliza sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She listened to the accusations without flinching, though inside she felt fear creeping in. She knew she had not done what they said. She was not the person the prosecutor described. His words twisted reality, turning her life into something it wasn't. But she could not speak. Her chance would come later, and she needed to stay calm until then. The prosecutor called his first witness. It was a neighbor, someone who had known Eliza for years. The neighbor testified that Eliza had seemed different in recent months, more distant and withdrawn. The prosecutor asked questions that led the witness to suggest that Eliza had been planning something. The crowd murmured, and Eliza's heart sank. She knew how things looked, but the truth was hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding. Next, the prosecutor brought in evidence. A diary, supposedly Eliza's, filled with angry words and plans for revenge. Eliza's eyes widened. She had never written those things. The diary was a lie, a piece of the puzzle meant to seal her fate. The prosecutor waved it like a flag, declaring it proof of her guilt. The room felt like it was closing in on her, each breath harder to take. As the prosecutor continued, Eliza glanced around the room. She saw faces she recognized, people who had once smiled at her in passing. Now they looked at her with distrust. Rumors had a way of changing people's minds, and the prosecutor was using those rumors to build his case. Eliza felt alone, more alone than she had ever been. Sheriff Jackson watched from the back, his mind racing. The stranger's words from earlier echoed in his head. He wanted to believe Eliza, but the evidence seemed strong. He could see the prosecutor's strategy, how he twisted facts to fit his story. Jackson felt torn, his heart pulling him toward his daughter, but his duty holding him back. He needed to find the truth, but he didn't know where to start. The prosecutor's voice was steady and confident. He addressed the jury, urging them to see Eliza for what he claimed she was. He spoke of justice, of the need to punish those who broke the law. His words were like arrows, aimed at the hearts of the jurors. He wanted them to see Eliza as a danger, someone who needed to be put away. Eliza's defense attorney sat quietly, taking notes. He was a calm man, not easily rattled. He knew the battle would be hard, but he believed in Eliza's innocence. He listened to the prosecutor's arguments, waiting for his chance to speak. He had a plan, evidence that could turn the trial around. But he needed the right moment. As the prosecutor wrapped up his opening statement, the room buzzed with energy. People whispered to each other, exchanging opinions. Some believed the prosecutor, others had doubts. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Eliza felt it pressing down on her, but she refused to let it break her. She held her head high, determined to see the trial through. The judge called for a short break. People stood, stretching their legs, talking in low voices. Eliza stayed seated, her eyes focused on the table in front of her. She could feel the stares, the weight of judgment from every corner of the room. But she also felt something else, a flicker of hope. She knew the truth was on her side, and she had to believe it would come to light. Sheriff Jackson used the break to think. The stranger's words haunted him. He wanted to find out more, to dig deeper into the claims of a conspiracy. If Eliza was innocent, he needed to prove it. The thought of her being punished for something she didn't do was unbearable. He promised himself he would find the truth, no matter what it cost him. The break ended, and everyone returned to their seats. The judge called the court to order, and the prosecutor continued his case. He called another witness, someone who claimed to have seen Eliza acting suspiciously. The witness described strange behavior, things that seemed out of place. Each word felt like another brick in the wall being built around Eliza. Eliza listened, her mind racing. She knew she had to stay strong, to wait for her chance to speak. Her attorney had assured her they had a plan, and she had to trust him. The prosecutor's case seemed airtight, but she knew there were holes, places where the truth could break through. She held onto that thought, using it to keep fear at bay. The day dragged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. Eliza's energy waned, but her resolve stayed firm. She was innocent, and she had to believe the truth would come out. Her father's presence in the courtroom gave her a small measure of comfort, even if he didn't speak to her. She hoped he was on her side, that he would find a way to help her. As the afternoon turned to evening, the court adjourned for the day. People filed out, talking in hushed tones. Eliza was led away, back to her holding cell. She felt the weight of the day pressing down on her, but she refused to let it crush her spirit. She needed to stay strong, to keep fighting. Sheriff Jackson lingered in the courtroom, lost in thought. He knew he had to act, to find out more about the stranger's claims. If Eliza was being framed, he needed to uncover the truth. He couldn't let his daughter pay for a crime she didn't commit. His heart ached with the weight of his decision, but he knew what he had to do. As night fell, Eliza sat in her cell, her mind racing. She thought of the trial, of the people who believed in her and those who didn't. She thought of her father, hoping he would find a way to help her. She needed to believe in his love, even if their relationship had been distant. She lay down, closing her eyes, willing herself to find strength for the days ahead. The town settled into an uneasy silence, the trial on everyone's mind. People whispered about what had happened, each person adding their own twist to the story. Eliza's name was on their lips, a topic of endless discussion. But Eliza knew the truth, and she held on to it like a lifeline. She would not give up, not now, not ever. The fight was far from over, and she was ready to see it through. The sun rose over the town, casting long shadows across the streets. People went about their morning routines, but their minds were on the trial. Conversations about Eliza filled the air. In homes and shops, people shared their thoughts on her guilt or innocence. The town was divided, each person holding their own opinion. At the bakery, a woman spoke with her friend as they waited for their bread. She remembered Eliza as a sweet girl, always helping at church. She couldn't believe the charges against her. Her friend, however, was not so sure. She recalled Eliza being distant, not speaking much to others. To her, Eliza seemed capable of hiding dark secrets. Children on their way to school whispered about the trial. They repeated what they heard from adults, their young minds trying to make sense of it all. Some said Eliza was innocent, while others believed the stories of jealousy and rage. The trial had become a topic of fascination, even for them. In the general store, the owner discussed the case with a customer. He remembered Eliza's visits, how she always greeted him with a polite smile. He found it hard to imagine her doing anything wrong. But the customer wasn't convinced. He had heard things, rumors that painted Eliza in a different light. The evidence, he said, seemed too strong to ignore. At the church, the pastor spoke quietly with a group of parishioners. They prayed for Eliza, hoping for justice. They remembered her kindness, the way she helped with events and cared for others. To them, the charges felt wrong, like a mistake that needed to be corrected. They prayed for the truth to come out. Meanwhile, Eliza sat in her cell, unaware of the discussions happening around town. Her thoughts were on the trial, the faces of those who once knew her. She wondered how they saw her now, whether they believed the lies or held on to the truth. She felt a mix of fear and determination, knowing she needed to stay strong. Sheriff Jackson was at his desk, deep in thought. The stranger's words from the day before still lingered in his mind. He needed to act to find out if there was any truth to the conspiracy. But he had to be careful. If he was wrong, it could cost him everything. He thought of Eliza, the daughter he barely knew. He couldn't let her suffer for something she didn't do. Jackson decided to start his investigation quietly. He couldn't trust anyone yet, not until he had more information. He began by reviewing the evidence, looking for anything that seemed out of place. He needed to find the cracks, the places where the truth might shine through. Back in the town, people continued to talk. The trial was the main topic of conversation, and everyone had an opinion. Some believed the prosecutor's case, finding the evidence convincing. Others doubted the charges, remembering Eliza's kindness and good nature. The town was split, and the trial had revealed the fickle nature of public opinion. In the saloon, men gathered to discuss the latest news. They shared drinks and stories, each adding their own spin to the tale. One man claimed to have seen Eliza acting strangely, while another defended her, saying she was always polite and respectful. The debate grew heated, but no one could agree on what to believe. As the day wore on, Eliza remained in her cell, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She hoped for a break in the case, something to prove her innocence. She thought of her father, wondering what he was doing. She hoped he was trying to help her, that he would find a way to uncover the truth. Sheriff Jackson continued his investigation, determined to find answers. He spoke with a few trusted contacts, asking questions and listening carefully. He needed to know if the conspiracy was real, if Eliza was truly being framed. Each piece of information he gathered brought him closer to the truth. That evening, the town settled into a quiet stillness. People returned home, but the trial was still on their minds. They talked over dinner, sharing their thoughts and concerns. Eliza's name was spoken in hushed tones, as if saying it too loudly would make the situation more real. In her cell, Eliza lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts drifted to the past, to moments of happiness and laughter. She wished for those simpler times, before the trial and the accusations. She longed for understanding, for someone to see her true self. Sheriff Jackson stayed late at the office, going over his notes. He was tired, but he couldn't stop now. He had to find the truth for Eliza's sake. He thought of her as a child, wondering how things had gone so wrong between them. He regretted the years they spent apart, and he hoped it wasn't too late to make things right. The night deepened, and the town grew quiet. People went to bed, but their dreams were filled with thoughts of the trial. Eliza's fate hung in the balance, and everyone knew it. The trial had become more than just a legal proceeding. It was a test of the town's conscience. Eliza closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. She needed rest, to gather strength for the days ahead. She didn't know what the future held, but she refused to give up. She believed in her innocence, and she held onto the hope that the truth would come out. As the moon rose high in the sky, Sheriff Jackson finally left his office. He walked through the dark streets, his mind still on the case. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to follow it. He needed to find the truth, for Eliza and for himself. As he reached home, he looked up at the stars, silent witnesses to the struggles below. He promised himself he would not fail. Sheriff Jackson woke early, the weight of the trial heavy on his mind. The sun barely touched the horizon as he prepared for the day. He knew he had to keep working on the case, had to find something that could help Eliza. His heart felt heavy with the burden of his choices. He had been absent in her life for too long, and now he had to make up for lost time. As he walked to the courthouse, he thought about Eliza as a child. She had been full of life, always curious, always asking questions. He remembered her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she learned something new. But those memories were old, and the years had been hard on both of them. He had taken a path of duty, and in doing so, he had left her behind. The courthouse loomed ahead. The town was waking up, people moving about their morning routines. Jackson felt their eyes on him, the whispers that followed. He knew they were wondering what he would do, if he would stand by his daughter or the law. His steps slowed as he neared the building, each one heavier than the last. Inside, the courtroom was quiet. The trial would resume soon, and the air was thick with anticipation. Eliza sat in her seat, her face calm yet determined. She saw her father enter, but their eyes did not meet. She wondered if he believed her, if he would ever speak up for her. She wanted to hope, but hope felt fragile. Jackson took his place at the back, his thoughts a storm of emotions. He had to decide what was more important, his duty or his daughter. The stranger's words still echoed in his mind. If there was a conspiracy, he needed to expose it, but doing so could end his career. He had to weigh the risks, the consequences of each action. But deep down, he knew what he had to do. The judge entered, bringing the courtroom to order. The prosecutor resumed his case, his voice confident as he spoke. He brought in more witnesses, each one adding to the picture he was painting of Eliza. Each word felt like a nail in her coffin, and Jackson felt his resolve harden. He couldn't let this continue. He had to act. As the morning wore on, Jackson's mind raced. He thought about his past with Eliza, the moments he had missed. He had chosen work over family, duty over love. Now he had a chance to make things right. He couldn't let her face this alone. He needed to be the father she deserved, the one she needed now more than ever. During a break, Jackson slipped out of the courtroom. He needed air, needed to clear his mind. He walked the streets, thinking about the stranger's words, about the conspiracy that could be framing Eliza. His instincts told him there was truth there, something he had to uncover. He decided to visit a few people in town, people who might know more than they let on. His first stop was the home of an old friend, someone who knew the inner workings of the town. Jackson knocked on the door, his mind focused on finding answers. The door opened, and he was greeted by a familiar face. They spoke quietly, exchanging information. Jackson asked questions, probing for details about the town's elite, about any whispers of corruption. His friend seemed hesitant, but Jackson's persistence won out. Bit by bit, he learned more about the connections between the powerful figures in town, the ones who might have a reason to frame Eliza. Jackson's next stop was the local bar. It was a place where secrets were shared over drinks, where loose lips might reveal more than intended. He sat at the counter, ordering a drink and listening to the conversations around him. He heard snippets, pieces of gossip that hinted at deeper truths. People spoke of debts and deals, of favors owed and scores to settle. Jackson listened carefully, his mind piecing together the puzzle. Back at the courthouse, the trial resumed. Eliza sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She had heard the whispers in the courtroom, the way people spoke about her. She felt their doubt, their judgment, but she also felt a flicker of hope. Her father was working on something, she could sense it. She just hoped it would be enough. Jackson returned to the courthouse with a new sense of purpose. He had gathered information, bits and pieces that suggested Eliza was being used as a scapegoat. The conspiracy was real and he needed to act. He had to be careful, had to choose the right moment. He couldn't afford any mistakes. As the day wore on, Jackson's determination grew. He knew he had to speak up, had to confront the truth. He thought of Eliza, of the years they had lost. He couldn't let this trial take her away. He had to fight for her, to protect her. It was time to bridge the gap between them, to be the father she needed. The prosecutor continued his case, but Jackson was ready. He had gathered enough information to make a difference. He waited for the right moment, watching the proceedings with a keen eye. When the time came, he would step forward, reveal what he had learned. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Jackson felt a calm settle over him. He was ready to speak, ready to face whatever came next. He knew the risks, knew what was at stake. But he couldn't let that stop him. He had a duty not just to the law but to his daughter. He had to fight for her, to stand by her side. The courtroom doors opened, and people filed in for the final session of the day. Jackson took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to do. He thought of Eliza, of the little girl she had been, and the woman she had become. He couldn't let her face this alone. He wouldn't. As the session began, Jackson felt the weight of his decision, but also a sense of resolve. He had to speak, to bring the truth to light. He had to be the father Eliza needed, the one she deserved. It was time to act, to stand up and make things right. For Eliza, for justice, and for himself. The courtroom was buzzing with tension as the session resumed. Eliza sat quietly, her eyes focused on the front. She felt the weight of the room pressing down on her, the whispers of doubt and judgment. But she also felt a small flicker of hope, something she hadn't dared to feel in days. She sensed her father was working on something, and she hoped it would be enough to help her. Sheriff Jackson stood at the back, his mind racing. He had gathered enough information to make a difference, but he needed to be careful. The stranger's words had set him on a path, and he was determined to see it through. He had to act, had to speak up for Eliza. He couldn't let her face this alone. He watched as the prosecutor continued to build his case, each word a step closer to the verdict. During a recess, Jackson stepped outside. He needed air, needed to clear his mind. As he stood on the steps of the courthouse, the mysterious stranger approached him again. The man was quiet, his eyes sharp and knowing. He handed Jackson a piece of paper, a list of names that could change everything. The names were powerful people in town, people who had reasons to frame Eliza. Jackson studied the list, his heart racing. The names were familiar, and he knew the connections between them. They were the town's elite, the ones who pulled the strings behind the scenes. The stranger spoke softly, urging Jackson to use the information wisely. It was a risk, a gamble that could backfire. But it was also a chance to uncover the truth. Back inside, the trial resumed. Jackson returned to his seat, the list clutched tightly in his hand. He knew he had to act, but he had to wait for the right moment. He couldn't rush in blindly. He needed to be strategic, to use the information to its fullest advantage. As the prosecutor continued his arguments, Jackson's mind worked furiously. He thought about the connections between the people on the list, the web of lies and deceit that surrounded them. He knew he had to expose it, to bring it all to light. But he needed to be careful. One wrong move could ruin everything. Eliza watched the proceedings with a mix of fear and hope. She felt the eyes of the room on her, the judgment in their gaze. But she also felt a sense of resolve. She knew her father was working on something, and she had to believe it would help her. She needed to stay strong, to hold on to the truth. As the session wore on, Jackson felt the weight of his decision. He knew he had to act, to speak up for Eliza. He thought about the years they had lost, the distance between them. He couldn't let her face this alone. He had to be the father she needed, the one she deserved. He took a deep breath, ready to make his move. The prosecutor finished his arguments, and the defense attorney stood to speak. The room was silent, every eye on him. He presented his case, casting doubt on the prosecution's evidence. He pointed out inconsistencies, questioning the reliability of the witnesses. His words were calm and measured, each one carefully chosen. Jackson listened carefully, his mind racing. He knew the defense was doing its best, but he also knew it wasn't enough. The conspiracy was too strong, the evidence too convincing. He needed to act, to reveal what he had learned. He couldn't wait any longer. As the defense attorney finished, Jackson stood. His heart pounded, but his resolve was firm. He had to speak, to bring the truth to light. He cleared his throat, his voice steady as he addressed the court. He spoke of the conspiracy, of the powerful people who had framed Eliza. He presented the list of names, each one a piece of the puzzle. The room was silent as Jackson spoke, every eye on him. His words were clear and direct, each one cutting through the tension like a knife. He revealed the connections, the hidden ties between the town's elite. He spoke of the stranger's information, of the evidence he had gathered. His voice was calm, but his words were powerful. Eliza watched her father, her heart racing. She felt a surge of hope, a sense of relief. Her father was speaking up for her, standing by her side. She had waited for this moment, and now it was finally happening. She couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude, a feeling of love she hadn't felt in years. As Jackson finished speaking, the room erupted in whispers. People exchanged glances, their eyes wide with shock. The prosecutor looked stunned, his confidence shaken. The judge called for order, his gavel echoing in the room. He demanded to see the evidence, to review the information Jackson had presented. The courtroom was a flurry of activity as people reacted to Jackson's revelation. The judge ordered a recess, giving everyone time to process what had just happened. Eliza was led out of the room, her mind spinning. She felt a sense of hope, a feeling that maybe things would turn out all right after all. Outside, Jackson took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling on him. He knew he had taken a risk, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. He had to fight for Eliza, to stand by her side. He couldn't let her face this alone. He had to be the father she needed, the one she deserved. As the sun began to set, the town buzzed with talk of the trial. People whispered about Jackson's revelation, the names he had revealed. The trial had taken a dramatic turn, and everyone knew it. Eliza's fate was still uncertain, but the truth was finally coming to light. That night, Jackson returned home, his mind still racing. He had taken a step, a big one, but there was still more to do. He had to keep fighting to see this through to the end. He thought of Eliza, the daughter he had lost and found again. He couldn't let her down. He had to be there for her, now and always. Eliza lay in her cell, her mind a mix of emotions. She felt hope, fear, and a sense of relief. Her father had spoken up for her, had stood by her side. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew she wasn't alone. She had her father, and she had the truth. She had to believe it would be enough. Sheriff Jackson knew what he had to do. The names on the list were a map to the truth, and he needed to follow it. He spent the night going over every detail, piecing together the puzzle of lies and deceit. Time was against him. He had to act quickly, but he had to be careful. The next morning, Jackson set out to find more information. He visited the people connected to the names on the list. He asked questions, listened carefully, and watched for any signs of deception. He needed to uncover the truth, to confirm the conspiracy that had been whispered about in the shadows. His first stop was the home of a wealthy businessman. The man was nervous when Jackson arrived, his eyes darting around as they spoke. Jackson asked about his connections to the other names on the list. The businessman hesitated, but Jackson pressed on, reminding him of the importance of honesty. Slowly, the man began to talk. He revealed that he had been pressured into silence, threatened by those more powerful than him. His words were like pieces of a puzzle, each one fitting into place. Jackson's next visit was to the town's banker, a man who had always seemed above suspicion. But Jackson knew better. He asked about the banker's dealings, about any unusual transactions. The banker was reluctant to speak, but Jackson's persistence paid off. The banker admitted to handling funds for some of the people on the list, funds that were used to influence decisions in the town. Jackson took note, each piece of information building a bigger picture. As the day went on, Jackson continued his investigation. He spoke with more people, each conversation revealing more about the tangled web of corruption. He learned about secret meetings, deals made in the dark to protect those in power. The conspiracy was real, and Jackson was determined to expose it. Meanwhile, Eliza sat in her cell, waiting for news. She thought about her father, about the risks he was taking for her. She felt a mix of fear and hope, knowing that the truth was within reach. She had to believe that her father would find the evidence needed to clear her name. Back in town, whispers of Jackson's investigation spread. People talked about the names he had revealed, about the possibility of a conspiracy. The trial had shaken the town, and now everyone was eager for the truth. Some were supportive of Jackson's efforts, while others were wary, afraid of what might be uncovered. As the afternoon sun began to set, Jackson returned to the courthouse. He had gathered enough evidence to make a case, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The people he was up against were powerful, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. But he had to try. He had to clear Eliza's name. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. The trial was set to resume, and everyone was eager to see what would happen next. Eliza was brought in, her face calm but her eyes filled with determination. She saw her father enter, and their eyes met for the first time in days. She saw the resolve in his gaze, and it gave her strength. Jackson took his place at the back of the courtroom, his mind focused on the task at hand. He knew he had to present his case carefully, to lay out the evidence in a way that would convince the judge and the jury. He took a deep breath, ready to fight for his daughter. The judge called the court to order, and the trial resumed. The prosecutor continued his arguments, but Jackson was ready. He waited for his moment, watching the proceedings with a keen eye. When the time came, he stood and addressed the court. Jackson spoke clearly, his voice steady as he presented the evidence he had gathered. He laid out the connections between the people on the list, revealing the conspiracy to frame Eliza. He spoke of the threats and the secret deals, of the pressure put on those who stood in the way. His words were powerful, cutting through the lies like a knife. The courtroom was silent as Jackson spoke, every eye on him. The judge listened intently, his expression serious. The prosecutor looked uneasy, his confidence shaken. Jackson continued, presenting documents and statements that supported his case. He knew he had to be thorough, to leave no doubt in anyone's mind. Eliza watched her father, her heart filled with hope. She could see the impact of his words, the way the truth was finally coming to light. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that she wasn't alone. Her father was fighting for her, standing by her side. As Jackson finished speaking, the room erupted in whispers. People exchanged glances, their eyes wide with shock. The judge called for order, his gavel echoing in the room. He announced a recess, giving everyone time to process the new information. During the break, Jackson and Eliza were able to speak briefly. They exchanged a few words, their eyes meeting with understanding. Eliza thanked her father for standing by her, for believing in her. Jackson promised that he would continue to fight, that he wouldn't stop until she was free. The trial resumed, and the judge called for the defense to present their case. The defense attorney spoke confidently, using the evidence Jackson had gathered to argue for Eliza's innocence. He pointed out the flaws in the prosecution's case, the inconsistencies in the witnesses' testimonies. His words were persuasive, each one building a stronger case for Eliza. The prosecutor tried to counter the defense's arguments, but the new evidence was too strong. His confidence wavered, and the cracks in his case became more apparent. The judge listened carefully, taking notes as the defense laid out their arguments. As the day wore on, the mood in the courtroom shifted. The truth was finally coming to light, and people began to see Eliza in a new light. The whispers of doubt and judgment began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of understanding. When the session ended, the judge announced that the trial would continue the next day. He wanted time to review the new evidence, to consider the impact it would have on the case. The courtroom slowly emptied, people talking quietly about what they had heard. Eliza was led back to her cell, her heart filled with hope. She knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. Her father was fighting for her, and the truth was finally coming to light. She had to believe that justice would prevail. Jackson returned home, exhausted but determined. He knew there was still work to be done, but he felt a sense of relief knowing that he had taken a step in the right direction. He thought of Eliza, the daughter he had nearly lost. He promised himself that he would continue to fight, that he would do whatever it took to clear her name. As the town settled into the night, whispers of the trial filled the air. People talked about Jackson's revelation, about the evidence he had presented. The trial had taken a dramatic turn, and everyone knew it. Eliza's fate was still uncertain, but the truth was finally coming to light. The town was changing, and with it, the hopes for justice and redemption. The next morning, the town was alive with anticipation. People gathered outside the courthouse, eager to see what would happen. The trial had become the talk of the town, and everyone wanted to witness the unfolding drama. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, a mix of hope and uncertainty. Sheriff Jackson arrived early, his mind focused on the day ahead. He felt a sense of calm, knowing he had done everything he could to help Eliza. His evidence had shifted the course of the trial, but he knew the fight wasn't over. He had to stay vigilant to ensure that justice was served. Eliza was brought into the courtroom, her face calm but her heart racing. She felt the weight of the room on her, the eyes of the people who had once judged her now watching her with a mix of curiosity and respect. She knew the truth was on her side, but she also knew the road ahead was still uncertain. The judge entered, calling the court to order. The prosecutor stood, ready to continue his case. But there was a change in his demeanor, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. The new evidence had shaken him, and it showed in his voice. The defense attorney rose, confident and composed. He began by presenting the evidence Jackson had uncovered, laying out the connections between the powerful figures in town. He spoke of the conspiracy of the efforts to frame Eliza. His words were clear and precise, each one building a stronger case for her innocence. The prosecutor tried to counter the defense's arguments, but the new evidence was too strong. His attempts to discredit the defense were met with skepticism from the jury. The cracks in his case were becoming more apparent, and his confidence was waning. As the morning wore on, witnesses were called to the stand. Some were people Jackson had spoken to during his investigation, people who had been pressured into silence but were now willing to speak the truth. They testified about the threats and secret deals, about the efforts to protect those in power. Each testimony added weight to the defense's case, painting a picture of corruption and deceit. Eliza watched the proceedings with a mix of fear and hope. She could see the impact of the testimonies, the way the truth was finally coming to light. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that she wasn't alone. Her father had stood by her, and now others were doing the same. The prosecutor called his own witnesses, but their testimonies were weak. The defense attorney was quick to point out inconsistencies, questioning the reliability of their statements. The tension in the room grew as the balance began to tip in Eliza's favor. The judge listened carefully, taking notes as each witness spoke. He was a fair man, and he wanted to ensure that justice was served. The evidence was compelling, and he knew he had to consider it carefully. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, the court took a brief recess. People stepped outside, talking in hushed tones about what they had heard. The mood was shifting, a sense of hope growing among those who had once doubted Eliza's innocence. During the break, Jackson and Eliza were able to speak briefly. They exchanged a few words, their eyes meeting with understanding. Eliza thanked her father for standing by her, for believing in her. Jackson promised that he would continue to fight, that he wouldn't stop until she was free. The trial resumed, and the defense attorney continued to build his case. He presented more evidence, documents that supported the claims of a conspiracy. He spoke with confidence, each word a step closer to proving Eliza's innocence. The prosecutor's confidence had all but disappeared. He struggled to counter the defense's arguments, his case unraveling before him. The jury watched with interest, their eyes on the evidence, their minds processing the information. As the day wore on, the mood in the courtroom shifted. The truth was finally coming to light, and people began to see Eliza in a new light. The whispers of doubt and judgment began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of understanding. When the session ended, the judge announced that the trial would continue the next day. He wanted time to review the new evidence, to consider the impact it would have on the case. The courtroom slowly emptied, people talking quietly about what they had heard. Eliza was led back to her cell, her heart filled with hope. She knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. Her father was fighting for her, and the truth was finally coming to light. She had to believe that justice would prevail. Jackson returned home, exhausted but determined. He knew there was still work to be done, but he felt a sense of relief knowing that he had taken a step in the right direction. He thought of Eliza, the daughter he had nearly lost. He promised himself that he would continue to fight, that he would do whatever it took to clear her name. As the town settled into the night, whispers of the trial filled the air. People talked about Jackson's revelation, about the evidence that had been presented. The trial had taken a dramatic turn, and everyone knew it. Eliza's fate was still uncertain, but the truth was finally coming to light. The town was changing, and with it, the hopes for justice and redemption. The town awoke to a day filled with anticipation. The trial had become a turning point, and everyone was eager to see what would happen next. People gathered at the courthouse, whispering about the new evidence and the shift in the case. The air was thick with expectation, and the crowd was larger than ever. Inside the courthouse, Eliza sat quietly, her heart a mix of hope and nerves. She had seen the change in the courtroom, how the truth was beginning to surface. But she knew there was still much to be done. She needed to stay strong, to hold on to the hope that the truth would prevail. Sheriff Jackson stood at the back, his eyes focused on the proceedings. He felt a sense of calm, knowing that he had done everything he could to help Eliza. But he also knew he had one more step to take. He had to confront the people on the list, to bring the truth fully into the open. The judge called the court to order, and the prosecutor stood to present his case. But his confidence was gone, and his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The new evidence had shaken him, and it showed. He struggled to maintain his arguments, to hold together a case that was quickly unraveling. The defense attorney stood, ready to continue. He presented more evidence, laying out the connections between the powerful figures in town. He spoke of the conspiracy, of the efforts to frame Eliza. Each word was clear and precise, building a stronger case for her innocence. As the defense presented its case, Jackson knew it was time to act. He stood, clearing his throat as he addressed the court. He spoke of the investigation he had conducted, of the people he had spoken to. He revealed the threats and secret deals, the pressure put on those who stood in the way. His words were powerful, cutting through the lies like a knife. The courtroom was silent as Jackson spoke, every eye on him. The judge listened intently, his expression serious. The prosecutor looked uneasy, his confidence shattered. Jackson continued, presenting documents and statements that supported his case. He knew he had to be thorough, to leave no doubt in anyone's mind. Eliza watched her father, her heart filled with hope. She could see the impact of his words, the way the truth was finally coming to light. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that she wasn't alone. Her father was fighting for her, standing by her side. As Jackson finished speaking, the room erupted in whispers. People exchanged glances, their eyes wide with shock. The judge called for order, his gavel echoing in the room. He demanded to see the evidence, to review the information Jackson had presented. The courtroom was a flurry of activity as people reacted to Jackson's revelation. The judge ordered a recess, giving everyone time to process what had just happened. Eliza was led out of the room, her mind spinning. She felt a sense of hope, a feeling that maybe things would turn out all right after all. During the break, Jackson and Eliza spoke briefly. They exchanged a few words, their eyes meeting with understanding. Eliza thanked her father for standing by her, for believing in her. Jackson promised that he would continue to fight, that he wouldn't stop until she was free. The trial resumed, and the defense attorney continued to build his case. He presented more evidence, documents that supported the claims of a conspiracy. He spoke with confidence, each word a step closer to proving Eliza's innocence. The prosecutor's confidence had all but disappeared. He struggled to counter the defense's arguments, his case unraveling before him. The jury watched with interest, their eyes on the evidence, their minds processing the information. As the day wore on, the mood in the courtroom shifted. The truth was finally coming to light, and people began to see Eliza in a new light. The whispers of doubt and judgment began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of understanding. When the session ended, the judge announced that the trial would continue the next day. He wanted time to review the new evidence, to consider the impact it would have on the case. The courtroom slowly emptied, people talking quietly about what they had heard. Eliza was led back to her cell, her heart filled with hope. She knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. Her father was fighting for her, and the truth was finally coming to light. She had to believe that justice would prevail. Jackson returned home, exhausted but determined. He knew there was still work to be done, but he felt a sense of relief knowing that he had taken a step in the right direction. He thought of Eliza, the daughter he had nearly lost. He promised himself that he would continue to fight, that he would do whatever it took to clear her name. As the town settled into the night, whispers of the trial filled the air. People talked about Jackson's revelation, about the evidence that had been presented. The trial had taken a dramatic turn, and everyone knew it. Eliza's fate was still uncertain, but the truth was finally coming to light. The town was changing, and with it, the hopes for justice and redemption. The next day dawned with a sense of anticipation. The courthouse was crowded, the air thick with tension. People had come to see the conclusion of the trial, to witness the final outcome. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, a mix of hope and fear. Eliza sat quietly, her eyes focused on the front. She felt the weight of the room on her, the eyes of the people who had once judged her now watching her with respect. She knew the truth was on her side, but she also knew the road ahead was still uncertain. The judge entered, calling the court to order. The prosecutor stood, ready to present his final arguments. But his confidence was gone, and his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The new evidence had shaken him, and it showed. The defense attorney rose, confident and composed. He presented his final arguments, laying out the evidence and the testimonies. He spoke of the conspiracy, of the efforts to frame Eliza. His words were clear and precise, building a strong case for her innocence. The prosecutor tried to counter the defense's arguments, but the new evidence was too strong. His attempts to discredit the defense were met with skepticism from the jury. The cracks in his case were becoming more apparent, and his confidence was waning. As the morning wore on, witnesses were called to the stand. They testified about the threats and secret deals, about the efforts to protect those in power. Each testimony added weight to the defense's case, painting a picture of corruption and deceit. Eliza watched the proceedings with a mix of fear and hope. She could see the impact of the testimonies, the way the truth was finally coming to light. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that she wasn't alone. Her father had stood by her, and now others were doing the same. When the session ended, the judge announced that the jury would deliberate. The courtroom slowly emptied, people talking quietly about what they had heard. Eliza was led back to her cell, her heart filled with hope. She knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. Her father was fighting for her, and the truth was finally coming to light. She had to believe that justice would prevail. Jackson returned home, exhausted but determined. He knew there was still work to be done, but he felt a sense of relief knowing that he had taken a step in the right direction. He thought of Eliza, the daughter he had nearly lost. He promised himself that he would continue to fight, that he would do whatever it took to clear her name. As the town settled into the night, whispers of the trial filled the air. People talked about Jackson's revelation, about the evidence that had been presented. The trial had taken a dramatic turn, and everyone knew it. Eliza's fate was still uncertain, but the truth was finally coming to light. The town was changing, and with it, the hopes for justice and redemption. The courthouse was silent as the jury filed back into the room. The air was thick with tension, a mix of hope and fear hanging over everyone. Eliza sat quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. The wait felt endless, and every second stretched on like an eternity. She knew that whatever happened next would change her life forever. Sheriff Jackson stood at the back, his eyes fixed on the jury. He felt a mix of nerves and determination. He had done everything he could to clear Eliza's name. Now it was up to the jury to see the truth. He hoped they would make the right decision, that they would see what he had worked so hard to prove. The judge called the court to order, the sound of the gavel echoing in the room. He asked the jury if they had reached a verdict. The foreman stood, holding a piece of paper in his hand. The room was silent, every eye on him as he spoke. "We find the defendant, Eliza Jackson, not guilty." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then the room erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps. Relief washed over Eliza, and tears filled her eyes. She had been vindicated, her innocence finally recognized. The weight that had been pressing down on her lifted, and she could breathe again. Jackson felt a rush of emotion, his heart swelling with pride and relief. He had fought for his daughter, had stood by her side, and now justice had been served. He watched as Eliza was freed from her restraints, her face a mix of disbelief and joy. The judge thanked the jury for their service and dismissed the court. People began to leave, talking excitedly about the verdict. The trial had been a turning point, and the town felt the impact. Eliza's name had been cleared, and the truth had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, people gathered to congratulate Eliza. They spoke of their relief, their joy at seeing justice done. Some apologized for doubting her, for believing the lies. Eliza accepted their words with grace, understanding the power of the truth. Jackson stood by her side, his presence a source of strength. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had done right by his daughter. They had faced a difficult journey, but they had come through it together. Their bond, once strained, was now stronger than ever. As the crowd began to disperse, Eliza and Jackson took a moment to speak privately. Eliza thanked her father, her voice filled with emotion. She knew that without him, she might not have been able to prove her innocence. He had believed in her when others hadn't, and for that she was grateful. Jackson looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with love and pride. He promised her that he would always be there, that they would face whatever came next together. They had been given a second chance, and he intended to make the most of it. In the days that followed, the town began to change. The truth had brought people together, had opened their eyes to the need for justice and fairness. Those who had been part of the conspiracy were held accountable, and a sense of healing began to spread through the community. Eliza found a renewed sense of purpose. She wanted to use her experience to help others, to advocate for those who had been wronged. She spoke at town meetings, sharing her story and urging others to stand up for what was right. Her voice was strong and clear, and people listened. Jackson continued his work as sheriff, but his role took on new meaning. He was more than just a lawman. He was a symbol of justice and integrity. He worked to ensure that the town's justice system was fair and transparent, that no one else would face what Eliza had. The town rallied behind them, inspired by their courage and determination. People came together to create a more just and inclusive community. They supported one another, recognizing the importance of standing up for what was right. Eliza and Jackson's journey served as a reminder of the power of truth and the strength of family. They had faced adversity and come out stronger on the other side. Their bond was unbreakable, and they knew they could face any challenge together. As the sun set on the town, Eliza and Jackson stood side by side, looking out over the community they had helped change. They knew there was still work to be done, but they were ready to face it together. The future was bright, and they were determined to make a difference. The trial had been a turning point, a moment of transformation for Eliza, Jackson, and the town. The truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. But more than that, they had shown that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. They had proven that with determination and courage, change was possible. And together, they would continue to fight for what was right, leaving a legacy of hope and justice for future generations. With the trial behind her, Eliza felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in months. The shadow of accusation was gone, and she was ready to start anew. Her name cleared. She wanted to use her experience to help others. She felt a deep desire to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she did. Eliza began volunteering at the local community center. She started programs to support those who felt voiceless. She wanted to give back to the town that had eventually stood by her. Her efforts were met with gratitude and respect. People admired her strength and determination. Her story inspired others to come forward, to share their truths and seek justice. Sheriff Jackson watched his daughter with pride. He saw her grow stronger each day, her resolve driving her forward. He supported her efforts, knowing how important her work was. He had learned much from the trial about the power of truth and the importance of family. He vowed to be there for Eliza, to never let their bond weaken again. At the sheriff's office, Jackson worked to improve the justice system. He wanted to ensure fairness and transparency. He held meetings with his deputies, discussing ways to better serve the community. He encouraged open dialogue and active listening. His leadership inspired change, and the town felt safer and more united. Eliza and Jackson often spoke at town meetings. They shared their journey, urging others to stand up for what was right. Their words resonated with the community, and people listened. Eliza's passion for justice was clear, and her voice carried weight. She became a figure of hope, someone who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. One day, Eliza decided to visit the local school. She wanted to speak with the students, to share her story and encourage them to pursue justice. The school welcomed her with open arms, the students eager to hear what she had to say. Eliza stood in front of them, her heart full of hope. She spoke about her experiences, about the trial and the challenges she faced. She told them about the importance of truth and the power of standing up for oneself. Her words were simple but powerful, each one leaving an impact. The students listened intently, their eyes focused on her. After her talk, several students approached her. They thanked her for sharing her story, for inspiring them to be brave. Eliza felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing she had made a difference. She encouraged them to speak up, to use their voices to bring about change. Back at the community center, Eliza continued her work. She organized workshops and support groups, creating a safe space for people to share their stories. She worked tirelessly, driven by the desire to help others. Her efforts were making a difference, and the community was stronger for it. Jackson often joined her, offering his support and guidance. He was proud of the work they were doing, of the change they were bringing about. Together, they were building a better future, one where justice and fairness prevailed. The town began to change. People were more open, more willing to listen and understand. The trial had been a catalyst, a moment of transformation that had brought the community together. Eliza and Jackson's efforts had inspired others to take action, to stand up for what was right. Eliza's work at the community center continued to grow. More people came forward, sharing their stories and seeking support. The center became a hub of activity, a place where people could find help and hope. Eliza's leadership was instrumental in its success, and she felt a deep sense of purpose. In the evenings, Eliza and Jackson would sit together, reflecting on the day's events. They talked about their hopes for the future, about the change they wanted to see. They knew there was still work to be done, but they were ready to face it together. Their bond was stronger than ever, and they drew strength from each other. One night, as they sat on the porch, Eliza spoke about her dreams. She wanted to continue her work, to expand the programs at the community center. She dreamed of a world where justice was accessible to all, where no one felt alone or unheard. Jackson listened, his heart filled with pride. He promised to support her, to stand by her side as they worked toward that future. As the days turned into weeks, Eliza's influence grew. She became a respected figure in the town, her voice carrying weight and authority. People looked to her for guidance, for inspiration. Her journey had shown them the power of truth and the importance of standing up for what was right. Jackson's work at the sheriff's office also continued to make a difference. His efforts to improve the justice system were paying off, and the town felt safer and more united. He had become a symbol of integrity and fairness, someone people could trust. Together, Eliza and Jackson were building a legacy. They had faced adversity and emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. Their journey was a testament to the power of truth, of family, and of hope. As the sun set on the town, Eliza and Jackson stood side by side, looking out over the community they had helped change. They knew there was still work to be done, but they were ready to face it together. The future was bright, and they were determined to make a difference. The trial had been a turning point, a moment of transformation for Eliza, Jackson, and the town. The truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. But more than that, they had shown that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. They had proven that with determination and courage, change was possible. And together, they would continue to fight for what was right, leaving a legacy of hope and justice for future generations. The months passed, and the town continued to evolve. Eliza had become a symbol of resilience and hope. Her work at the community center flourished, reaching more people each day. She was a voice for those who felt unheard, a beacon of hope for those who felt lost. Her story was one of triumph over adversity, and it inspired many. Eliza's influence extended beyond the town. She was invited to speak in neighboring communities, sharing her journey and encouraging others to seek justice. Her message was simple but powerful. Truth and courage can change the world. People listened, and her words sparked a movement for change. Sheriff Jackson remained a respected figure in the town. His dedication to justice had improved the community's trust in the legal system. He worked tirelessly, ensuring fairness and transparency. He had become a mentor to his deputies, teaching them the values of integrity and compassion. The town felt safer under his watch, and people were grateful for his leadership. Eliza and Jackson's relationship had grown stronger than ever. They had faced the darkest moments together and emerged with a bond that could not be broken. They were a team, working side by side to make their community a better place. Their journey had taught them the importance of family, of standing by one another through thick and thin. Eliza's work at the community center continued to expand. She introduced new programs, focusing on education and empowerment. She wanted to give people the tools they needed to succeed, to build better lives for themselves and their families. Her efforts were met with enthusiasm, and the center became a hub of activity and hope. One day, a young woman approached Eliza at the center. She spoke quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. She had faced injustice and needed help. Eliza listened, offering support and guidance. She knew what it was like to feel alone and misunderstood, and she was determined to help others find their voices. The young woman left with a sense of hope, knowing she was not alone. Eliza's impact was felt throughout the town. People began to speak up, to stand up for what was right. The town was becoming a place where justice and fairness were the norm, where people supported one another. It was a transformation that had been sparked by Eliza's courage and determination. Jackson continued his work at the sheriff's office, but he also took time to support Eliza's efforts. He attended community events, speaking about the importance of justice and integrity. He encouraged people to get involved, to take an active role in their community. His words resonated with people, and they responded with enthusiasm. As the town changed, so did Eliza's vision for the future. She dreamed of expanding her work, of reaching even more people. She wanted to create a network of support centers, places where people could find help and hope. It was an ambitious goal, but Eliza was determined to make it a reality. Jackson supported her vision, offering his help and guidance. He knew the importance of her work, and he wanted to see it succeed. Together, they began to plan, to lay the groundwork for a brighter future. Their bond was strong, and they drew strength from each other as they worked toward their goals. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Eliza reflected on how far they had come. She thought about the trial, about the challenges they had faced. It had been a difficult journey, but it had led them to a better place. She felt grateful for the support of her father, for the love and strength he had shown. Jackson looked at his daughter, his heart filled with pride. He had watched her grow into a strong, confident woman, someone who was making a real difference in the world. He knew that their journey had not been easy, but it had brought them closer together. He was grateful for the bond they shared, for the love that had sustained them. As the sun set, Eliza and Jackson spoke about their hopes for the future. They talked about the change they wanted to see, about the legacy they hoped to leave behind. They knew there was still work to be done, but they were ready to face it together. Their journey had taught them the power of truth, of family, and of hope. The trial had been a turning point, a moment of transformation for Eliza, Jackson, and the town. The truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. But more than that, they had shown that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. They had proven that, with determination and courage, change was possible. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Eliza and Jackson knew that their work was far from over. They were determined to continue their fight for justice, to create a world where everyone had a voice. Their journey had only just begun, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would continue to fight for what was right, leaving a legacy of hope and justice for future generations. Their story was one of resilience and courage, a testament to the power of truth and the strength of family. And as they looked to the future, they knew that they would face it together, side by side, ready to make a difference in the world.